I don't think you can know what the end is supposed to look like before you start doing any actual work. I tried to have it perfectly packaged and wrapped up with a neat little bow on it and say, this is exactly what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to go hit record and it's going to be perfect. And that's just not the case. And that's why it took me so long. I had to give that up and get to good enough so that I could mold it while I was building it.
Create for No Reason is your weekly dose of inspiration to create what you believe should exist in the world. It's where passion meets craft, and we explore the joy of the creative process and building a meaningful body of work. Nick, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Kate. It's good to see you.
You too, as always. I really love our conversations, and every time we chat, honestly, I feel like every time we talk, it could be an episode. It is an episode.
This is basically just us hanging out recorded.
Yes, that's kind of what we talked about when Nick and I talked a couple weeks ago. We were talking about what we wanted to talk about on the show, what direction we wanted to go, because there's multiple directions we could take it. We wrote a bunch of notes, and then we were like, all right, it's going to be what it's going to be. But the value that we know that we're going to offer you as the listener is you're going to get some type of inspiration. You're going to realize that creativity is messy and creating is messy. And you'll learn a couple things that you can use on your whatever you're creating, right?
I hope so. That's the plan. We'll find out how good we are.
I know so, because that is the direction that we're going to go. So, Nick, why don't you share a little bit about let's talk a little bit about one of your projects that you started, a year ago? Because you started your podcast about a year ago.
It's been almost 6 months. It's been like a year in my head, and then it's been live for about 6 months. I just released episode like 24 or 25, and I do one a week. So we're about halfway through the year. So basically January. It was around when I launched the first episode.
All right. So you started.
So that's more than a year. That doesn't add up at all.
All right. Well, I feel like it's been a year.
February 19th was my trailer. March 22nd was the first episode finally launched. Okay. So now we got our facts straight.
All right. That's really important. Thank goodness you cleared that up. So we've got.
That's what you get when you get me.
Yes. So this is cool because it's a newer project for you. You thought about it for however long, and then you launched it. What did that process look and feel like? Because I think a lot of people that are listening, they have a creative project that they've been talking about, researching, thinking about, and almost procrastinating launching it and getting it out because of that, whether it's perfectionism, imposter syndrome, whatever they're dealing with. So what was it like to actually get it out into the world?
Oh, it was miserable.
Oh, awesome.
It felt impossible because I wanted to get it right.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can know what the end is supposed to look like before you start doing any actual work. I tried to have it perfectly packaged and wrapped up with a neat little bow on it and say, this is exactly what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to go hit record and it's going to be perfect. And that's just not the case. And that's why it took me so long. I had to give that up and get to good enough so that I could mold it while I was building it.
Yeah. Oh, I feel like that is so true in lots of projects. How did you press publish on your first episode, kind of getting over that need for it to be quote unquote right?
Well, I had to give up. Once I gave up the fact that I thought I was doing the real work by trying to get it perfect, the whole premise and the structure of the show, all of the different show segments and questions, like having it all perfect. I wanted to do that. And once I realized that that was not the actual work, the work was getting on calls with people and doing the interviews and asking interesting questions and being genuinely curious, wanting to explore a topic and seeing where it takes me. Once I overcame that as a thing, I booked my first guest as a forcing function. So it was like a lot of things have to happen before I hit publish. I booked the guest and I prepared as best I possibly could to interview. It was Andrew Kaplan, who's a growth consultant for tech companies. And I was like, let's just make it happen. And I was ridiculously nervous to host that conversation because, like, I don't really know how I'm going to do this because it still felt too abstract in my head. But all of a sudden, you start having a conversation and like the path builds in front of you. It became so obvious to me in that moment as I was talking to him. I was like, oh, this is exactly what it's supposed to be. And then
Yeah.
every conversation after that just became easier and easier. And it's not like it's like there's any less prep that's involved or they're not, you don't have to try. It just feels way more natural. And you don't feel as like, you don't feel the tension of like, what is it supposed to be? What's it going to look like? It can look like whatever you want it to look like.
It's almost it really lays out the creative process beautifully because you have to do the thing to understand what it wants to be and to understand where you want to take it. Like I feel like we all can have this little idea like for writing a book. It's kind of a lot of people say they have an idea for writing a book and it's in their head and they think about it a lot, but until you actually put pen to paper, you're never really going to know like what is each chapter? What do you want to write? What are the stories you're going to include? Same thing with a podcast. So when I think about podcasting, what's interesting is when you start and you were so hesitant to get on the phone with these people, which I love that you kind of called yourself out that you thought that doing the work was the prep and the strategizing, and that's not the work. The work is doing the work, of having those calls, and this idea of not being able to get it right. I've been thinking so much about there is no right. There's no right. It's just all about the
There's
process
done
and
or not done. That's it.
yeah. So when you so when I think about who your first few guests are, I know that people that are creating something like a podcast or a show or a channel and they want to bring other people into that conversation. When you think about who did you want to reach out to first? What did that look like? Because I think so often people think, "Oh, I have to reach out to very well-known people," or that's how you have to start it, which to me seems even more overwhelming because you don't have any reps to prove that you're good at interviewing. So, hey, just get some reps in before you call on the big guys.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely felt that tension too. It's like, should I get like come out with a bang with a really good guest or like a well-known, super popular guest? And it's like I don't think someone being well-known is the key to having a successful podcast. If anything, it makes your podcast harder to host because they have their talk track that they give on every show. And that was the thing I wanted to avoid was like in B2B, every podcast is basically the same. Everybody goes on everybody's show and they ask them the same three questions. They all say the same three things. Like it is the same show, just copy and paste across the entire like podcasting network of B2B marketing information. I was like, I screw that. I want nothing to do with that. And I heard Jay Kunzo say this once, and it lives rent free in my head, which he was like, you know, you've heard insert guest name here. You've heard this guest before, but you've never heard him like this. And that was something that I really, really wanted to bring to life inside of my show. So that was one of my major focuses. But then it was like how to pick a guest. It wasn't so much about how do I find a guest that's super well known. It's like how do I find a guest that's just willing to be open and share and have a real conversation with me. Like I joke that's like you got to take off this like fake human coat that we all put on where we try to like be business version of ourselves and not actually just say the thing that you mean or share anything about what you're trying to build or about your life. And not to say you need to be vulnerable, but it's just there are certain people who they won't let that guard down or they don't feel safe enough to have a real conversation with you about what's going on in their life. And it doesn't make for an interesting episode. So there's a couple things here as I'm saying this out loud that are coming into focus for me. One is like creating a space where people are willing to let their guard down, which I had to learn how to do. The other one is like asking relevant questions or knowing what follow-up questions to ask like to dig deeper or where to dig deeper. Because a lot of times they'll say something and you don't really know. You're like, okay, next question. So there's a whole bunch of things in there, but it's not about having a big name guest. I think you can get a big guest if ask them the right questions, but you don't need that to have a successful podcast. I've had people tell me. One guest followed up with me a few weeks later. He goes, "Nick, what drugs are you selling here?" So what are you talking about? He's like, "I've had more people reach out to me from being on your show than I have ever had in the probably close to 1,000 interviews I've done in my career." And like podcasts that I've been, he's like hundreds, if not over 1,000 at this point. And no one follows up after the show. People listen to your episode or like me on your show and have reached out to me saying that's where they heard about me and they were like they really enjoyed it. She's like, and what are you doing? I was like, it's just interesting content. Like I don't think it's anything that groundbreaking other than the fact that you said something here that you've never said anywhere else, and I worked really really hard to try and create that environment where we could have that conversation.
Oh, that's so cool. What a compliment.
Yeah, it blew my mind. I was like, woo, I posted that. I shared that everywhere. I was like, what drugs are you selling? Like, that's what I want to hear. You want people who are on other shows to feel like you took care in their interview. Like you prepared for it, or that you didn't just ask them the same three questions they get asked on every other show. Like that's people hate doing that stuff. It's just
Yeah.
not fun for anybody. It's not fun for you as a host. It's not fun for them as a guest. It's just like to just toe the company line, basically. Even if they are their own business owner, it's just like, here we go again. You're not going to get them excited about it. And they're definitely not going to want to share it.
It's almost like people that are creating for the purpose of, I want to have a big show, I want to have big numbers, I want to get sponsors, I want it to be a business, versus people who are creating because I really believe in these stories. I really care about having these kinds of conversations. Those are two very different approaches. And when you come from it from a place of what you're doing, which is you want it to be interesting, you're putting a lot more attention on the craft of interviewing and podcasting and less on the how am I going to package this up and get it out to as many people and get more listeners and viewers. Obviously, you want that, but I think so often, especially over the years, practicing the craft is not talked about as much as the marketing and packaging and getting it out and going viral. Which
I think one comes before the other. Like if your goal is to have a big show, you're going to have the same show that everybody else has because you're not going to care about the show. You're going to care about trying to get sponsors and get big guests for your show. And I mean, yeah, is it possible? Of course. But you're not going to care. And very few people are going to actually care. I think that I believe in the way that I'm building the show. I think that, and if I stay the course and continue to do what I'm doing, and guests are really, really excited to be on the show, I've had people reach out to me and say, like, what do I have to do to get on your show? And I'm like, what? What are
I
you talking
love
about? Like,
it.
you ask, I guess. I don't know. Like, it's not like those are the types of things that I want to build. And it's like, and I'm building a place where people they're excited for the next episode to come out because they want to hear what other people are doing. They're interested in the type of conversations that we have. I get notes from people all the time that are like, hey, thanks for normalizing this for me. The chaos that goes on in between my ears is like, I always just feel like I'm doing the wrong thing. And thanks for making me feel like I'm not crazy. And it's like I didn't do anything. All I did was have a conversation with someone about the realities, like what is true, objectively true about their life. Like, and this is what's so amazing about doing this work in this way.
And your show, because now I'm imagine someone listening is like, Nick, what is your show about?
You'll never know. You have to find it. It takes you have to.
I
The only
can't
way to
find
go
one.
to listen to the show is to stumble upon it on the internet. No, it's called 1,000 Routes, and basically the whole point is like I explore stories of solopreneurs who have taken the bet on themselves, who have made this bet on themselves, and they want to build a business that serves their life. I mean, we all have the internet, and we all see there's a million. Everyone's trying to get you to have $100,000 months and do all these crazy things. And it's like there's a lot of conflicting advice in terms of how you should build a business and what you're supposed to do. And then there's what people actually are doing. Like there's the loudest people in the room are always like over. It's so easy to forget that people are just building a normal type of business, doing normal people things, and they're not like 10xing everything and publishing on LinkedIn 1,000 times a day. And so like
But
I'm
Nick, that is the only way. That is the way. Everybody says it. It's the only
I
way.
know. And that's like the whole point of the show. It's like, so I've made this point to capture 1,000 different routes, 1,000 different ways that people are building a business, right? And it's like all about the lessons they've learned in the uncommon route they've taken to stand out in this world that I believe is purposefully trying to commoditize us.
Yeah, it's an interesting show, especially because more and more people are going that solopreneur route.
Oh yeah.
And it is interesting with the content that's out there. There is just so much focus. Well, I say this very well knowing that obviously some of my feeds are pushing me the content that I'm obviously consuming. So I don't know what other people's feeds are. Maybe they
Yeah,
are
but
full
they'll
of
take anything. They're like, "Oh, you stopped on this turtle video for 0 seconds. All you're seeing is turtles from now on." So, like, if
you
you
must
stop,
love
you
turtles.
must love turtles. Like, you must really love this hustle, like, content because you stopped on it for 1 second.
Well, it's like it's that constant be be more productive than anyone else. 10x, like you said, 10x everything. Like it's build and grow. It's all about bigger, better, like bigger. Like bigger
Yeah,
is always better.
yeah,
And one of the things
more.
that we focus on at the company that I run a coaching company, and we talk to a lot of people around your future. What if your future was smaller and better? Like what it doesn't always have to be bigger. And when I think about creating content around that, because you're talking about a podcast, you have a it's a nice size podcast, but it's not like hundreds of thousands of downloads that you're getting. You're creating this niche audience of people that really, really love you. It's like Kevin Kelly's 1,000 true fans. You're creating this really true fan community that's excited. Like, could you imagine if you offered someone, hey, you can have this podcast where 100,000 downloads and people are kind of like, whatever, it's okay. I watch it because it's on, versus 1,000 people that are Nick, when's the next episode coming out? I can't wait to listen. Hey, how can I get on your show? Those are two very different goals, but the second one feels to me like where a lot of people would want to play, because that's exciting. Now you're like one-on-one conversations with people. You know that you're really supporting people and helping people. And I would argue that the people that are listening to your show are actually gaining something out of it that is improving their life. They're taking action on the ideas versus you have this massive audience of people that are probably watching and not really implementing what you're talking about.
Oh, and entirely. And I think like we're all in the relationship business, and that is 100% a lot of the reason why I choose to create the show that I did. So like versus the traffic business. Like I will sell a course. Like I have a course coming out soon in partnership with Erica Schneider that's going to come out in the next few weeks, but like it's a high ticket course. It's not going to be like $49. And so the reason, but all that to say is like I'm in the relationship business. I sell professional services or private consulting and coaching services. So I don't need all of the people in the world to be a customer of mine in order to make a good living. I need like 5 to 10 people on the planet at any given moment to be a customer. And it changes the dynamics and the mechanics of your marketing engine and how you build. So it's much more focused on deeper relationships because it is a commitment to hire me. And I feel like if people are going to hire me, they should probably know what they're getting into and know who they're hiring. So people with thousands and thousands of downloads, like they're trying to build this traffic engine. It's just a different type of business and entirely. And that's not what I'm trying to build.
Yeah. And It goes back to what you're doing with your show, which is there's lots of ways in which to do it. One or the other isn't worse or better. It's just what are you committed to doing? And how much time are you committed to doing it and how many resources you have? And so I think it's just important for us to get really real with those
Yeah.
conversations. And being in marketing, when I used to run my marketing company, it was always so interesting because I feel like the advice that like I love that you're doing your show because the advice that a lot of people are sharing is really good for bigger businesses with a lot of resources and people to execute on this stuff. And it doesn't always serve the solopreneur or someone that's doing it for themselves. And so I think it's really important for people to really recognize and understand that. I think some people are trying to play in the game, they're trying to play the same game as someone who is well above where they are, instead of like, hey, it takes a little bit of time to get there, so like where are you? Which is why I think it's cool when people are interviewing, like we all need more conversations of people who are a few steps in front of us instead of 100 steps in front of us. It becomes so much easier to not only feel sane and like you actually are making progress, but it's also the advice that they share, you probably can take versus
Yeah.
advice from like, a Mark Cuban who is a billionaire who has done, uh, you know, uh, who- it's just a little bit harder to relate.
Yeah, and I specifically tell my guests, like, no, don't give advice. Just don't. You're not here to tell anybody what to do. I want you to talk, just share what you have done or what you are doing. That's it. Like, let's
Yeah.
just talk about that. I don't want you to give anyone advice. And I think the whole point is that like everyone is out there being like, this is how you build a business. You got to post all this, you got to do this, you got to do that. So there's all of that stuff out there. And it makes you feel like if you're not doing it, that you're doing something wrong. And the whole point is that, well, what are people actually doing who are building a business that suits their life, like objectively successful or whatever, however you want to describe it. It's like it works for them, or they're just trying to figure it out and it's working, but they're still not where they want to be. What are they doing? And that I think is way more important than like because than just looking at the advice you see floating around the internet, because it's like
Yeah.
you don't know what to do with that. It's just like, here's what everybody does to be successful, and it's like, well, that's coming from you, so let's hear from people who are just doing things. And sometimes they share, oh yeah, I bought this course and it refocused me, and it's like, cool, that's interesting, but it's not the thing. It's a combination of like 100 things or hundreds of things that inform and influence how they operate and how they choose to build. And it's not like a linear thing. This is the other thing that's like crazy. It's like building the business and building the show are like largely, they're like metaphors for each other, because the glide path isn't perfect. You're just trying to figure out the next step along the way. I mean, you have a vision for what you want it to be and where you think you can take it, but the thing evolves. There is no destination. It just continues to evolve as you're doing the work, and you're like, oh, it's kind of taking this turn. Do I like that? Do I not like that? And then you decide, how do you course correct?
There is no destination. I have to remind myself of that all the time when I'm working on anything because I do get stuck in this idea of when will I feel like it's complete? When will I feel like it's done? When will I feel like I finally got it? And I've had to realize, oh, you never feel that way. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, that feeling doesn't go away. I've only been at this like a year and a half as an entrepreneur, and it doesn't go away. I mean, people I talk with who are 17 years into it, they're like, doesn't go away. People I
Yeah.
talk to 5 years in, doesn't go away. It's just what it is. And I think like I tell people, like, you don't have to be crazy to do this work, but it helps.
Oh my gosh. What's cool though is the reason we feel that way is because we are growing. We wouldn't feel that way if we weren't growing, right? Like we're growing and we're learning and we're gaining new skills and we're seeing things differently. And only because of that do we always feel like, oh, now I can do it this way or I can do it that way. But you have to be in it. I mean, I remember last year I hired a marketing agency to help us with these webinars. And Nick, I swear, I was like, this is it. This is the answer to all of our problems. And I was so excited. And we did it. And at the end of our year, I thought, okay, I could say that this didn't work, but that's not true. It did. It didn't get the results that I wanted,
Mm.
but my results were probably a little outrageous, like to think that in a year, like it was successful in a number of ways, and one of the things that I only discovered after another year was, wow, we developed as a team a lot of really great skills, and now we are building and executing webinars so consistently, and it's become a really great way for us to connect with our clients and connect with prospects and for people to understand more about what we do and how we serve people. And so it's been a huge success in the long run. It's a huge success because of all the things that we've learned, and it's I am just so blown away by how much we've been able to accomplish simply because we spent that year taking the time to work on it. But it was a process. Like it took us a while to figure out, how do you build it out? How do you build a webinar in a way that actually provides enough value, but it's also structured in a way that gets people to take action, to move on what you want them to do, whether it's a call or a workshop or something. And so you have to think about both of those things when building a business. And so there's this, I feel like it's both of those things are important, right? Like it's this idea of creating enough value, but also making sure that what you're doing moves people to take some type of action.
Yeah, and I think that's the tension we all feel as people who make stuff, which is how does this make us more money? Like that's the thing that nobody's really willing to talk about too often is no, like it's either create because you like have this passion for podcasting, or it's like be a business savage and like just hustle as hard as you possibly can. Like it doesn't feel like that you can be a middle ground. And I think that there is a middle ground, which is kind of the way that you're talking about your webinars, which is like you're creating a thing that is meaningful to other people, but it also has to support your business. Like I'm building this show because I think it's meaningful to other people. And I think it's a show that needed to be created, but it also supports my business. So there's a whole bunch of, there's a lot of tension there for people like us who make stuff because they feel like they're like it's hard for the to see the through line. It was hard for me in the beginning. It was like, where's the through line between this work that I'm trying to like I want to do and the thing that puts food on the table for my family?
Yeah. And sometimes it takes
Time.
starting and doing it and actually creating it for you to then say, "Oh, and now I can use this here. I can use this in my sales process. I can use this to have conversations with prospects. I can invite people on." And like that's where I feel like it's interesting too. Like whenever we're creating something, sometimes there's no way we would be able to see how we can link certain things that we're creating together to support our business until we're actually doing it. And when we're doing it, we're meeting new people, we're collaborating with others. And so those things we could never have planned out had we not started. So that's what I love too, is like you start something and all of a sudden, like with my podcast, it's funny because I started doing some more things on Threads and I started meeting really cool people on Threads. And so I invited some of them to be on the show. I never would have met them had I not started looking over at Threads and seeing what was happening on that platform. So it's like you have to be in this constant state of learning, growing, developing your skills, and exploring what makes you curious. Something that makes you curious is yelling at people. No, I'm kidding.
I'm not
Nick,
curious about that.
we were
It's
talking
something that happens.
It just happens. Nick likes to rant on certain topics and ideas because you're very passionate about them. But we you had told me about this newsletter that you have wanted to create. And so let's talk a little bit about that because it's a new project that you have not yet launched, but you're working on it, you're working through it. So let's talk a little bit about what you're going to do with this newsletter.
So the newsletter, just for context, I have a newsletter right now, and it's basically the 1,000 rounds newsletter. I distill and take content from the show and just write about it and just add more thoughts to certain stories or things that people share. And it's okay in that it exists. I don't love doing it, and so I don't do it a lot. And I had this idea of rebuilding the newsletter under the name Sorry for Yelling. And it was going to just be some unhinged rants of that the rants that I just want to have. And if it's another one of those like passion projects, and I'm like, I don't know where the through line is just yet, or how it supports my business, or how I could use this. But it's something that's like I can't publish this to LinkedIn, or I don't feel like publishing stuff like this to LinkedIn. And it's not 100% like things from the show. It's just kind of this independent thing. And it's way more like it's way more of this the random thoughts that I have that feel like they have no place to go. And so this is where I was going to put them. I was going to rebuild the newsletter under Sorry for Yelling and just share a thought or a rant. And I'm majorly inspired by Erin Balsa's Boldface newsletter. She does daily newsletters, or five Monday through Friday, and they're really short and pithy, just like simple stuff. Some are a little bit longer than others, some are only a few sentences. And I'm just really inspired by that because there are no rules. We've told ourselves that a newsletter has to be like you got to publish it every Friday, and it has to be long form, and it has to be this whole like complete thing. And no, it doesn't. There are literally no rules. You can do whatever you want. And so I was going to take my inspiration from her and what she's doing and try to apply some of that, and strip off some guardrails that I've created myself to create this newsletter called Sorry for Yelling, which is going to be basically the ramblings of a of a madman.
Oh my gosh, I love that. So what are some of the topics? Do you have like a couple topics?
Oh, I mean, they're still gonna be related to like just life as solopreneurship and life, and what I think it's gonna be a little bit closer to like things that I a lot of common themes or a lot of common problems that I see pop up all over the place. And it's interesting how there's so many parallels. Like when one client faces a problem, I find that almost all of my clients tend to bring up the same thing at the same time. So, for example, pricing is like a really hot subject right now. Everyone's like very fixated on pricing strategy, pricing structure, and tactics and tips and all these like all the things. And so, um, pricing would be one of the things I would yell about, and just because it's just a topic that seems to be coming up a lot. Misconceptions about niching down, that's a big part of my business and what I help people do. Uh, and just like certain things that I hear a lot that that almost like myths. And this is me kind of working this out in real time with you about like what I want it to be, because I haven't really thought much about it beyond like this is something I'd like to do, if there was more hours in the day.
Well, are you go but you're
Oh,
going
it's
to
going
do
to
it.
happen.
Yeah.
It's just slow. It's just happening slower than I want it to happen.
So what do you think that you could do to make it easier for you to like schedule and ship it, like to get it going?
I think my calendar is really the main thing that prevents me from doing the work. Because I mean, the reality of my business is that if I'm not on calls with clients, I'm responding to most clients. If I'm not responding to clients, I'm doing something for the podcast. And if I'm not doing something for the podcast, I'm doing something for, I'm creating a piece of content from the podcast. If I'm not creating a piece of content from the podcast, I'm probably trying to run doing some sort of other marketing or business development. And if I'm not doing that, I'm generally working on my program. And if I'm not working on my program, then I'll be writing for funsies. So like I'm always trying to improve the program, and it's like, and that is something that comes in waves, but generally I'll prioritize that over some other things. So it's just tough, and there's not a lot. I have 2 kids. I mean, there's not a lot of like extra time in the day, so the hours that I have kind of get put. I try to be as like useful with them as I can be, but so once I find that time, once I got to create it. It is not found. It is created. Once
Yeah.
I create that time, you will be the first person to get a draft of that newsletter, and
Yes.
you'll see me yell about something.
I love it. I love that you said writing for funsies.
I mean, as much as like that's what it feels like right now, and I think this is the other thing that I think we get wrong, or like why programs get cut, is that it's like you're gonna be podcasting for funsies for the first few months because it's not gonna do anything for your business. You're gonna be writing your newsletter for funsies for a few months. It's gonna feel completely pointless. And it's not just like, oh, did somebody hire you because they heard you on your podcast? No, that will probably never happen. People are gonna hire you because you interviewed their best friend or one of someone they really know, like, and trust, and they recommended you listen to the show, or they recommend you read the newsletter, or someone you interview may become a client. That has happened, but it's just not going to be a straight shot. They're going to introduce someone you interview is going to introduce you to somebody that they say, you should have this person on your show. They're really like, I think they would make a great guest. And then you build a relationship with them and then ultimately become a client. That's happened, but it's not a straight shot. It's like, I can't just look at the podcast and go, oh, this thing is paid for itself, or this thing is like, I'm losing money on this thing.
Well, it's why so many people start. People are great. People are great at ideas. Everyone's got ideas. Lots of people can start. I mean, it's challenge. It can be hard to start, but it can be, can be one thing to start. But that's why so many. I don't know what the numbers are, but it's crazy how many podcasts, like millions of podcasts that are out there that have less than 7 episodes. You get
Yeah.
started because you're like, I'm so excited to do a podcast, and then 7 episodes in, and you're like, wow, this is actually work. And it's funny because I just posted on LinkedIn today something, a little clip from one of my episodes that was all about the why behind creating. And you have to have a strong why to create, even for funsies, because otherwise you're not going to keep doing it. And it's got to be something that is important to you. And when I think about even this show, right? Like I did the show and then I took a long break from it. I could have just kept it done. I could have just kept it dead, or not, and just not brought it back. But to me, having these conversations is really important. And I love the idea of thinking about what will this be? Like, what does this show want to become? And I'm just going to keep having these conversations and see where it goes. And it's part of why I wanted you to be on the show, because you have to talk to other people that are creating to kind of keep that not even the motivation, but just it pumps me up to hear about what other people are doing and how they're creating and doing work, because then it just keeps me pumped about my ideas and what I want to do. Like, even as you're talking about your newsletter, I'm thinking about, I used to do a weekly newsletter every Sunday, and Nick, I loved it. I was like, this is so great. I love writing it and I get it out. But I was writing it on Saturday, shipping it on Sunday, and it became more stressful than fun. It became work instead of, hey, these are just ideas that I want to share. And to your point with the no rules, I wrote down no rules because there are no rules for a newsletter. Like, you can create whatever you want to create and put it out. And what I was doing on my newsletter was, it was a lot of time, right? Like, writing, I often will use that quote that I love so much. I would have written a shorter note. I just didn't have the time, because to get something in a newsletter that is short and impactful, it takes a lot of time. It takes a long draft, and then you have to edit it, and then you have to, and getting it out. And so I stopped doing like that long form podcast, and I started just sending people like clips of the podcast and things like that, because there is still value in that. It's a very different type of newsletter because now it's more of like a, hey, here's this show I made. You can go listen to it. But it can be whatever you want it to be. The way that you're describing, sorry for yelling, reminds me a lot of Seth Godin, because Seth Godin ships every single day
It's like a
a
sentence.
podcast.
Like he like writes a newsletter. It's like a single sentence sometimes.
Yeah, but it's so good. And everything, it's so good. But what's interesting is sometimes, I mean, there are some that are so powerful and amazing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I
Yeah.
would I wish I wrote that. That's amazing. Other
They don't
times
need
it's
to be
like,
long to
oh,
be good.
they what?
They don't need to be long to be good.
No, they
But
don't
we've
need to be
told
long to be
ourselves
good.
this. Like this is the whole problem. I don't know. I had someone told this to me the other day on my show actually. And another thing that lives rent free, she was like, I've been so SaaS pilled. Like SaaS companies have just ruined my brain in terms
Oh,
of how I think about marketing and what stuff is and does and the rules. Like, and you gotta shed all of that because a newsletter is whatever the hell you want it to be. Your podcast is whatever the heck you want it to be. It does not matter. It just has to be it has to. I think the important thing and the struggle that people face and the thing that I've struggled with for the year or so trying to create this thing was, what the hell am I going to explore? What is the point? And once it hits you, you're like, oh, this show must be created. I heard someone say that they're like, the world doesn't need another newsletter. Well, it doesn't need another one of those like SaaS newsletters where it's the same thing as everybody else's newsletter. But the world very much needs what you were writing about. Like, I don't know what your newsletter was called, but like the world needs that stuff. Like, does the world need Sorry for Yelling? I'd hope so. I think so. I think the world does need 1,000 routes.
yeah.
Like just based on the things that people say and the response from even the guests, just being able to have a place to share the stuff that they're trying to figure out and going through, that means a lot to me. So yeah, I think the world does need it, because if it means something to even a handful of people, that's plenty. Like your whole point is like 1,000 true fans is kind of the goal on that one. So yeah, I don't know. I think I've heard and you talked about like building this type of work over a long period of time earlier. One of the things I think about a lot is Cal Newport just wrote a book called Slow Productivity. And one of the major themes of the book, which sticks with me, is measure your success over years and decades. Measure the output of your efforts in years and decades, not weeks and months. And it's like, it's easy to look at my show, since March, it's October now, and go, yeah, it's probably could cut it. It hasn't built my business to this mega level. So it's easy to look at that and say, let's cut it. But the whole point is that I kind of set myself up for this, which was like 1,000 routes. I want to do 1,000 interviews. Will I get there? I hope so. Will I do
You
more? I
will.
would love to do it.
You will.
That's the plan. And the
You
whole point is
will.
like, I want to measure this. And there's 52 weeks in a year. So I do 52 interviews a year. Like it's going to take me a while to get to 1,000. That's the point, is that I want this to be an endeavor over the course of years, because I want to look back and say, look at this massive body of work that's been produced through this thing. If I were to look at it over the course of a few months, like you optimize for the metrics that you track. And if I'm sitting here trying to track, like, did I make any money off of this thing in a few months? It's like, well, I'm either going to create a terrible show, I'm going to recalibrate the show to be something stupid or something that I don't like, or I'm gonna just keep doing what I'm doing, because I know that over the course of years, I think it's going to make a massive impact.
Yeah. Decade thinking. I love that. I love the quote by Matthew Kelly where he says, we overestimate what we can accomplish in a year and underestimate what we can achieve in a decade. Becoming a decade thinker and thinking long term, you do approach things differently. You also take losses differently, because it's not really a loss, right? It's if your show is not doing great, or if you're creating something and it's not gaining traction. If you look at it in a span of a year, it doesn't really matter. But 2, 3, 4, 5 years, when you really look at the shows that are super successful, or writers that are really successful. I mean, I look at some writers that they have 10, 12, 20 books, they just keep writing because they believe that their work should be out in the world. And that's a really beautiful way to create something. And your belief is awesome, Nick, because I think we have to have the why, and we have to have the belief in our ideas. You said your friend said no one needs another newsletter. No, people don't need another newsletter, but they need ideas. People will always need ideas, inspiration, and new content for them to think about. And as we as creators think about what is this idea that I want to share, I know I sometimes have the challenge of, oh, this idea is too basic. Everybody already knows this, but that's not true. The things that you feel like are so common that everybody knows, they don't, because not everyone is living, breathing your world the way that you are. So,
Yeah, the curse of knowledge is very real.
yes.
Like this whole obvious, non-obvious thing. There's so many things that are so obvious to us because you live it every day, and they are very non-obvious to other people. And that's the hardest thing. Is like when you have this curse of knowledge, you think everything is so obvious, and then you talk to a few people. You host a podcast, you talk to a bunch of people, and you realize pretty quickly that, oh, this thing that I think, nobody thinks that. I'm very much like, this is very non-obvious to people, and people like to hear that. They want to hear this thing because, like, oh, for they've never heard that before, and it changes everything. So yeah, getting out of your own way, because we're all stuck in our own little bubbles. So everyone around you may, like, the few people that are around you may intuitively get or just already believe this thing, but the vast majority of people outside your bubble probably have no clue what the hell you're talking about or any of that
Yeah.
stuff. And
Yeah.
it's easy to forget and lose sight of some of those things. That it's like, oh, this is just so incredibly obvious. Like, nobody needs to know this. And it's like, lots of people need to know this. Like, I think the work that I do sometimes is pretty obvious, but turns out very non-obvious.
Yep. That's why people hire you, because you know the answers to some of the challenges they're going through. And sometimes they don't even know. They don't know what's
Right.
available to them.
Right.
All right, Nick, I always ask everyone on the show this one question. What is one activity that people can do in 10 minutes or less to live a more creative life?
Go for a walk.
Go for a walk.
Go for a walk.
Simple, easy.
There's like an actual scientific thing for this, and I'm going to butcher the explanation of it, but here's how I understand it. Your brain does its best thinking about problems when you're not actively thinking about the problem. When I first started this business, I worked a lot, and my wife she'd tell me, like, Nick, at some point, a few months in, she's like, Nick, the answers are not in your screen. And that was her just being a good wife. It was like, spend more time with your kids and me, please. It's like, okay, cool. And then all of a sudden, everything started to come into focus. And it's like, what's going on here? And then I read about this. I think Rand Fishkin published about this. A few other people I've read have published things about this idea. But your brain does the best work on a problem when you're not actively thinking about it. Why do you get all your best ideas in the shower? Because you're not thinking about it. Why do you get your best ideas when you're playing with your kids or hanging out with your dog or doing whatever thing that you're doing? Because your brain needs that space. And most people don't downplay the importance of something as simple as just like, go for a walk. I think they said you're like, people who spend like 30 minutes a day around trees are like 10,000 times happier. Like, go be around a tree.
Be around a tree. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Yeah, well, I take a nice long walk every morning after my workout, and it's truly my favorite part of the day. And I mean, I'm very blessed because I live like my walks are along the intercoastal, so I'm on the water and I get to see the sunrise, and it's gorgeous. And so, I mean, I'm around a lot of palm trees, not necessarily like
I guess it kind of counts. The
it
the
counts.
trees in Florida, I guess they're still trees. So I guess I don't know. I didn't do the study. I couldn't tell you if palm trees do or don't count, but I'll
They
I'll give you
count.
credit. I'll give you credit.
All right. All right. Oh my gosh, Nick, it's always so much fun talking to you. Thank you so much for being on the show. We'll have to have you come back after you launch. Sorry for yelling, and hear how it's going.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Kate. This has been a blast. I'm glad we get to jam, and I'm glad we got to do this one recorded so that now the world has access to our unhinged ramblings.
Yes. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And more importantly, I hope you got at least one idea that you're going to leave with to help you with your creative project, to help move your creative project along. That is such a big part of this show. It's, yes, I want you to walk away feeling inspired and excited, but more importantly, it's to take action. It's to move your project even one step forward. And so these are the conversations that we get to have. And so Nick is obviously a really interesting creator, and he's out there creating lots of incredible content. And I love so much the passion that you can feel that he has for the work that he's doing. He truly believes in his podcast. He believes in these conversations. And obviously his listeners feel the same way because they're reaching out to him. So whatever you're working on, I hope there's one thing. In fact, why don't you write down that one thing right now so you don't forget it? Write down the one thing that inspired you the most from this episode, and then what is the one action step that you're going to take to move your creative project forward? As always, thank you so much for listening. I so appreciate you. Until next time, go create something.